Welcome to Incremental Edge. This episode was recorded live as part of our Investment Savvy CFO discussions. This is part 2 of the series. We go behind the scenes with Peter Holt to understand how CFOs are actually assessed, hired and positioned in today's market. We move from theory to reality. If you're thinking about how you make your next move or how you're perceived at board level, this conversation gives you a practical view of what really matters. Our second half of our agenda, we couldn't let Peter and Tom be here today without grilling them a little further. So what I've got in front of me is a combination of questions that have come from you guys. So thank you very much for those, and questions that we generally see CFOs wanting to ask of Peter and Tom or people in their positions. So our first topic of conversation is what a board's really looking for from a CFO. And I'm very much sat in the seat of asking for a friend here from a CFO point of view. So I suppose we've talked a little bit about strategic CFOs.
Yeah.
It'd be great to dig into it a little bit further. What does that actually mean?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting one, and as I said, I think the terms strategic and commercial
come up often
and can be sort of widely used, and there's that natural question of what is strategic, and I think there's probably a few parts to it. So when we're looking at work from our perspective, we split into 3 distinct areas as the way we're judging candidates.
Right.
That's looking at their functional experience, which is then understanding where they sit against their peers as CFOs, and where they sit against the rest of the leadership team that they're going to work within. And we're trying to understand and make sure that there is a real balance to that management team. So finance by people by nature should be looking at what we would class as measuring value. So they will be leading people who are obviously financial, operational and HR, all of which are people that should be improving how we measure our value. On the other side of that, you've then got people who are driving value. So that would be tech people, sales people, marketing people, that side of things. When you're talking strategic, you're wanting someone who ultimately is leading and influencing that measuring value side of our business, and really making sure that that's moving forward. When we're then thinking situationally, as I say, I think interestingly, when people talk strategic, quite often they are talking about situational experience, and that's then about as I think said in the earlier session, about the additive of what are the experiences that a CFO is bringing to the table that's going to be additive to the rest of our leadership team. So if we are looking to go on a journey where we're going to be acquiring other businesses, then we want a CFO who has had experience situationally in buying other businesses and integrating those businesses into the business they've worked for. So when you're saying strategic, you would really be saying we want somebody who's situationally done that. That's the strategic driver of that particular business.
Yeah, that makes sense. So that's where the growth plan really comes in, and what levers that business is looking to pull to get that exit value.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay, second question. What are the most common misconceptions that CFOs have about the market?
So there's probably a few. I think part 1 is time served means experience.
Okay.
And actually what people are looking for is somebody who has genuinely influenced and made something happen within a business. Quite a lot of times when we're talking to candidates, they can sometimes be concerned about their job title. And if I'm not titled CFO, what does that mean in the context of looking for a new role? If I'm titled finance director, if I'm titled financial controller, the pieces that matter more is what you've been doing in that role and the influence that you've had in that role. So really critical that somebody's thinking about that.
Yeah.
I think then from a credentials perspective, where people can have that sort of misconception is that they're thinking that my experience talks for itself. So when we're working with very experienced CFOs, they can sometimes go to meetings with private equity guys where they're very much sort of saying almost, well, I am what I am, so therefore you must know that I'm a great CFO just based on my track record and based on my credentials and experience. And yes, clearly that helps, but it's also then about bringing that to life in the context of an opportunity and showing your understanding of a business that you're potentially looking at, and that clearly that shows interest and starts to show that you're somebody that's starting to think about how they would influence that business.
Yeah, so just dig into that first one a little bit more. So if someone sat there without the job title that they think they are delivering for the business, or the job title that recruiting team is looking for, how do you address that in, I don't know, CV or LinkedIn profile to show the experience you've got and the situations that you've been in?
Again, it's bringing that experience to life, which through your CV, I think is probably easier than through something like LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Because, like you say, LinkedIn is very much more of a sort of snapshot, isn't it? So,
yeah.
So I think then the critical piece is making sure, if you're using a search provider to look for a role, or a recruiter to look for a role, that they understand the value that you've brought and where you've sat in a business, and the impact that that's had on the business.
Yeah, and then in that second scenario, so loads of experience, loads of situational experience, how does a CFO bring that to life then in conversation so that they can show that that's what they've done and what they're bringing to the table?
I think a lot of it is then relating it to the business that you're talking about and potentially interested in working with.
Yeah.
And showing how your experience relates to that. So if you're a CFO at the moment and you're working in a tech business that's grown from X to Y over a 3 or 4 year period, and you're meeting a business that's in a similar space, then it's bringing to life the things that you did that had a real tangible impact on that business, that's going to give that investor or CEO comfort that you could have that same impact and influence on their business.
Yeah, and I suppose that comes back to what you were saying earlier about then that direct referencing.
Yeah.
If they're going to be speaking to the CEO that you were working with, knowing that
the proof of the pudding's there, isn't it?
Yeah.
To sort of say, this is what this person did, and this is where things stood. And I think, interestingly, Tom in the earlier session made a really valid point about that doesn't necessarily mean that everything has to have been perfect at all stages. The reality of business, the reality of life is that, the journey of an investment cycle is very rarely just a straight line upwards. So we're also wanting to see from that finance professional how they've adapted to those challenges and come through those other areas. I think, interestingly, when we're doing work, sometimes actually somebody whose career has been very unblemished sometimes can have a challenge in processes, because people are almost sort of worried that how will they deal with it when the proverbial hits the fan? What's going to be their sort of mode of operandi to actually try and deal with it when they've never had that scenario in their career to date?
Yeah, interesting. So actually that perfect CV maybe doesn't always tell the right picture for...
Exactly, yeah. So people could sometimes be almost sort of desperately chasing something that they think is what people are going to want to see, when actually, that everybody recognises that isn't how it really works.
Yeah. Okay. So what genuinely differentiates a desirable CFO from the rest of the pack?
I think there's probably quite a few things. The big things that I would really sort of get it down to is around genuine attitude to business ownership. And again, I think we talked about this earlier when we were talking about that sort of real right hand to the CEO and being that true business partner to a sort of founder CEO. That's really, really critical. So that person who is genuinely owning the numbers, really taking responsibility for how we move forward, that's the piece that I just think is absolutely critical for finance people when they're working there. I think, again, going back into my past, I've done this role for a long time, and finance directors of 10, 15 years ago would probably be more those kind of people that were reporting the information and almost saying, over to you, CEO, your problem to deal with it as you see fit. I'm telling you what the information tells us, deal with it.
Yeah, off you go.
Yeah. Whereas now, that absolutely is the exact opposite. We're wanting people who can really influence that change and be a real part of it.
Yeah. And what do you see as the reasons people struggle when they go into a PE environment for the first time? If they don't sort of gel with that place, what happens? What's the challenges?
So culture, I think, is a big part of that, and that can be broader than PE backed as well, can't it? But when you're looking at it from a private equity backed business perspective, finance is the centre of a lot of the running of that organisation, and the CFO has got to be somebody who is very comfortable that is the case, that we are the centre of it, and is somebody who really wants to drive that change and, as I say, embrace being the centre of that, really. So I think that's one of the things that people can struggle with. I think then the other piece is around handling ambiguity. Again, a lot of finance people can, because of the background, can be in that situation where it isn't black and white, but there's sometimes a clear right and wrong. In the world that you're in, when you're wanting to grow quickly and develop quickly, you probably won't be able to have all of the facts and at your fingertips before you make a decision. So you're going to have to gain the data, get as confident as you possibly can with the decision, but then commit to a decision.
Yeah, actually make it and move forward
rather than forward with something that you hope is 80-90% of the way there, rather than trying to get every single pound and pence reconciled to give yourself that comfort that you are 100%. But by that stage, the decision could be too late.
Yeah. Okay. So that leads us on to a question that did come from our audience. So, what behaviours signal that CFO has plateaued?
So I would say part one is probably relying on credentials too much and relying on history. I think that's a big mistake. And again, I think, interestingly, I don't think that's unique to CFOs, is it really? That can be in lots of exec roles around a leadership table. I think the other thing which is a real telltale symptom, and something that a lot of CEOs that we work with often flag, is around that genuine interest in the business and the levers of the business, and really, really wanting to be a part of that leadership team and be involved in that. So we obviously, a lot of the work when I'm getting mandated on CFO searches, there's typically reasons behind that, isn't there? So it could be that a business has taken new investment and therefore they need a CFO for the first time. It could be that the business is growing exponentially and situationally needs a CFO who's been through different challenges.
Yeah.
The other area is when we're replacing an incumbent CFO. And the replacing the incumbent CFO, I would say probably 9 times out of 10 is because of the fact that the leadership team and the private equity house involved don't feel that person is integrated with the rest of the leadership team,
right,
and is therefore able to genuinely influence the leadership team.
Yeah, so that, I suppose that comes back to what you were saying earlier about complementing each other as a leadership team is so key to building out a team that's going to go at pace and get the exit value that the investors want.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about interview process then. So what is it that boards are trying to answer when they are interviewing CFOs?
So, as I say, I think there's probably a few parts to that. The biggest part is around that situational complementarity between the different people on the leadership team.
Yeah.
Again, you've got the core things that we've said before, that we need to know that the data's great, we need to know that the person can produce that kind of thing, but taking that as a given, that those sorts of things are referenceable and we're very confident that they're delivering those things, then it's really then about the additive to the rest of the leadership team. So what that investor's looking for is someone that's going to bring things to the table that the current leadership team don't bring. And therefore they can bring both that experience and therefore then the influence to that to help them move forward on that front. And again, interestingly, when they're then naturally thinking, I think Tom mentioned before, when they've invested in a business, they immediately start talking about who is the future investor. and therefore what do we need to look like in order to attract that kind of person? What does our business need to be? What kind of market do we need to be operating in? And the CFO is one of their key eyes and ears. So that person has to be thinking like that. They need to be thinking about, right, okay, this is the journey of how we're doing this, and therefore actually this is what, in order for us to be that, this is the kind of business we need to be. This is the way we need to present that business, and this is the way we can then move ourselves forward.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point for the whole leadership team as they go through investment, isn't it? That actually their eyes should be on what they should look like at the end of that particular investment period, and look at peers that are at that EBITDA or at the point that they're aiming for, and what that makeup of team looks like, so that they know where they're heading and what they need to get to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And finance and CFOs can often be one of the key pivotal, almost trajectory changes in a leadership team, because again, rather than, I think when you think about people in different areas of a management team, the sector experience and domain experience typically is very, very important. Actually, in finance, it is the one area that quite often is a lot less important, because, as I say, it's more about the situational experience someone's going to be bringing to the table. So you can bring in a complementary view where they're bringing potentially fresh ideas because they haven't worked in that sector exactly. And they've maybe worked in adjacent spaces which are relevant and interesting, but not directly the same. So then they can say, well, this is things that we did in this business. This is how that might adapt to the way that we would want to work here. So actually, it gives you a chance to almost open the door a little bit, really, in finance.
Yeah, and that was actually a question that we had in, was how important is sector or industry experience when a CFO is incoming compared?
It depends on the scale of the investment, I would say, is the reality. If you were looking at that trajectory of, we're a private business and we're just about to take private equity, or we've taken a primary investment and we're on the journey towards growth to the next stage, I would say sector is relatively low on the list of priorities for people on that front. They're definitely wanting more about the confidence in their credentials, the experiences situationally to be able to drive the kind of projects and change that we know we're going to go through. Once you start to get into the mid cap and the large cap type investments, then I would then say sector then comes into play very heavily again, actually. But again, that's because the roles are typically much more specific. And again, I don't think that relates purely to finance. That's across a broader exec role. If you're a £500 million, £60-70 million EBITDA business, the role of the CFO is very different in that business than a 20-30 million, £4-5 million EBITDA business. And therefore, the skill sets they'll go for will also differ.
Yeah, interesting. And so if a CFO was not in a PE-backed environment today, but wanting to move into that world, what would you say they should be doing now to get themselves to a point where they'd be considered?
Yeah, well, so one is getting their business to the stage where ultimately it is exit ready.
Okay.
Even if it has no intention of ever doing anything. So if you're a finance person working in a private business, then you can still produce the kind of information that an external investor, external advisor would say is of the kind of quality that they would look for. So producing that kind of information and getting yourself to that kind of quality, I think, is part one. I think then the other part is then when you're thinking about the experiences that you need, cash leverage and cash control is obviously one of the big parts of being a CFO in a debt leveraged or private equity backed environment. So if you're working in a very cash rich private business that has very little cash controls around it, then that's a pretty tough sell to help a private equity house understand why your experience is going to be relevant. If you can be working in that environment, but you're still creating the kind of cash controls and drives and expectations in that business internally to make sure you're maximizing all those things, then that's what will make you somebody that they will feel more confident of being able to make that transition.
Yeah. And do you see that happen where CFOs move into that PE environment from an owned environment and thrive in those situations?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Again, it's natural evolution for some people, isn't it? And it's what somebody wants to do and how they want to develop themselves, I suppose, really. So yeah, from their perspective, doesn't mean every private CFO will be able to make it as a private equity CFO, or vice versa, a private equity CFO being somebody who will be successful in a private environment. So I would always say with these things, it's almost developing your own toolkit, but almost leaning into the journeys where you're going to be able to offer the most influence. And as I say, I think sometimes it's a good and a bad thing, isn't it? As I said, I think earlier, being the center of everything as finance is a double-edged sword, isn't it? So the frustration may be if you work in a private business where you feel that finance has got very little influence, that actually that's frustrating for you. Flip side, as I say, you can sometimes be careful what you wish for if you're then in the other end of the extreme, and then you are literally sort of under the spotlight a lot more. And it's whether you thrive and you want that, really.
Yeah, so finding where you fit and what your skills bring to either environment.
Absolutely.
Okay, so what is one behaviour that signals if a CFO is ready to make that move or not?
I'd say ownership mentality is the biggest piece. You want somebody who is acting like the CEO, thinking like the CEO, and thinking about, as I said, the journey that we're going on and what we're going to need to be able to develop internally to make ourselves what we need to be to drive exit value. So that mentality of that being the central driver rather than being the sort of the scorekeeper at the side.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so here's another one that's come from our audience here today. So they've said, we've talked a lot about the changing role of finance. How has that impacted skills you look for when recruiting into finance? And is traditional finance education keeping pace with this need?
Okay, that's a good question. So part one, the first part was around, remind me again.
So how has the changing role of finance impacted skills and skills that you look for when recruiting?
Yeah, I think that the power of data by far and away that's the area that I think has changed the most over that. And as I say, that's not just in being able to produce loads of data, it's about being able to manipulate and that data, bring that to life, both internally for people in the business and for external stakeholders and external investors. So that is absolutely critical. So I would say that's by far and away the most important factor.
Yeah.
With regards to the qualification, I think that's an interesting one actually, because I see there's three main. I appreciate there are others. There's three main accounting qualifications. So chartered accountancy, which is typically in the larger accountancy firms, then CIMA and ACCA, that can be either out of accountancy firms or they're trained in business and in industry. All I think are held in high regard. Typically, people will hold the chartered accountancy probably as the pinnacle, because of the fact that it's typically trained in the bigger accountancy firms. Now, interestingly, looking at the syllabuses and that they have, you would say probably of the three of them at the moment, the ACCA is probably the one that's adapted the most to the changes that have been going on. And probably related themselves more to it. But I appreciate that the Chartered Accountancy Institute and also CIMA are making sort of changes around it. So would that make me say somebody should do ACCA over that? I don't think it's tangibly different particularly, but it is definitely interesting to see how they will all adapt.
Yeah, and it relates actually to another question we've had in, which is how much value do you place on CFOs having these professional qualifications, and would you recommend CFOs continuing with CPD in role?
Yeah, so I would say yes to both of those things. So one, professional qualifications are absolutely vital. I don't think in my 20 years of recruiting CFOs into private equity houses, I don't think I've ever placed anyone who isn't a professionally qualified accountant. So I think that's absolutely critical. And that's not necessarily about saying somebody who has decided to be as essentially qualified through their own experience isn't able to do what you're doing. It's more about the fact of almost the trust and the comfort.
It's that rubber stamp.
That rubber stamping of somebody to give you that sort of comfort. So I'd say that's absolutely critical. From a professional development perspective, I also think absolutely critical, and that can take quite a few different guises, can't it? So obviously the professional accountancy qualifications dictate that you have to do professional development in order to retain your qualifications. So there's always things that people will be doing, but that can then lead to further professional qualifications, whether it be MBAs, etc. But I think, say, almost broader than that, it's probably more to think about your own skill set and how you develop your own skill set. Interestingly, I won't say which business, but I'm doing a piece of work at the moment for a business, and the chairman was talking about the interviews that they got and was comparing them against the CFO in another business, a portfolio business that he's also the chair of, and he was saying what I think some of these people I've met so far have lacked compared to that person is that he has proactively got himself a business coach. He's making changes in himself. He's doing those things. He's not waiting for me to tell him. He's going out of his way to do that side of things. And I've asked these candidates about what are they doing to develop themselves, and their answers have been limited or nothing. And therefore, that's a gap in my eye. So it was interesting to hear it almost straight from the horse's mouth that it will have a tangible impact on what somebody thinks of someone. Yeah.
And how often are you seeing that further professional development with things like an MBA or other masters? Are you seeing CFOs striving towards those as well as they go through their career?
Yeah, exactly. Again, it's what matters to people, isn't it? But I definitely think if somebody's on that path to saying, I'd love to see myself as a CFO and then future CEO, then that's one of the elements that's starting to, again, proof of the pudding, to start to say, I've thought about this as a wider business professional. I'm taking these qualifications in order to further enhance myself as a wider business professional, all of which helps to build that sort of story and background, really.
Yeah, and I suppose it comes back to that strategic thinking piece, that broad MBA experience and understanding what really matters in each of those different areas can really layer on top of those professional qualifications for a finance leader to give them that broader piece.
If somebody's wanting to be a CFO or CEO of a private equity-backed business and they've got an MBA, but they don't have the situational experience that the people are going to require, then they're still not going to get the gig. So it's not going to overarch other things. However, it'll definitely add to the story and add to their credibility.
Yeah. Okay. So final question from our audience: how can a CFO prepare for the transition to a CEO position?
Well, as I say, I think definitely. So one of them, I would say, is the professional qualifications, and think about those areas. And as I say, I think then broader than that, as that chair had said, think about business coach. Make sure you have a business coach. I think all good CEOs have got business coaches. I think then when you go into the wider leadership team, which includes CFO, I think it probably is a lot more spotted then, really, on that front. And actually, if you're aspiring to be there, then start acting that way, don't you? And start doing those sorts of things in order to change that. I think then the other piece is then about actually doing, when doing the job, it's about showing that broader, wider ownership of a business and what it's going to need to be in the future. And I think that's the thing that gives the investors in particular comfort that the person's going to be somebody that could be the future leader of the organisation.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so final couple of quick fire questions. So 1 or 2 word answers for these.
Okay.
What is one overused interview phrase?
Well, we've all used it today, haven't we? So I would definitely say commercial and strategic. And the reason I say that is when CFOs are asking me what is commercial and strategic. It's a fair question. In the same way that if a CFO is meeting up with a future investor or employer and saying, I'm a strategic CFO, then you can be pretty certain that CEO is thinking, what are you talking about?
Yeah, what does that actually mean?
Yeah, it's about really bringing to life your situational experience.
What is one underrated capability?
I would say people skills and influence. So yeah, that ultimately you can have fantastic numbers-based finance professionals as great financial controllers, potentially finance directors, but ultimately to be the CFO, you've got to be somebody who's got that high EQ and ability to be able to work very closely and influence people.
Yeah, and I suppose bring them on a change journey, bring them through a growth journey,
and get them recognizing the way you're thinking, get them either bought into the way you're thinking or helping them, and be able to adapt to that.
Okay, what's one question a CFO should always ask in an interview process?
And again, this is probably going back to almost more basic interview etiquette, but I think interestingly, it's something that most CFOs that I talk to either forget about or overlook, because they're very much focused on trying to show why I'm the right person and let me show you about my experience, is actually asking the person about themselves,
right,
and understanding about what's their journey been that's got them there, how that has then led to them having this conversation. Obviously, more often than not, people like to talk about themselves, don't they? But actually, it really helps a CFO start to understand what page is this person on, and what really is this all about. And interestingly, when you're private equity backed, one of the positive things about that is that typically you're all on the same page, because you've all got that sort of end goal that you're all very clear to.
Yeah.
So to some extent, that can reduce some of the politics, but ultimately, everybody is still their own person, aren't they? So if you're talking to the CEO of a private equity-backed business, they will still have things going on in their life, other things that they've got to, balls that they're trying to juggle, things that they're dealing with, and actually their reason for being there, and you understanding that reason for being there and helping that person achieve that reason for being there is something that can be a real critical piece to get that CEO-CFO relationship so tight.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, final one. What's one thing that boards think but rarely say?
Well, that's a good question. I'm thinking about what I would say that we wouldn't say. I'm not sure whether I should say it now. I'm thinking that. There's probably lots of things. I think, and again, it refers back to what Tom had said before. I think the bits that often aren't said is the frustrations when either problems or challenges haven't been brought to the table soon enough.
Yeah.
Again, when I'm thinking about, quite often, if in that sort of bucket of some of the roles that I'm doing of replacing incumbent CFOs, then quite often those replacements are because of the fact that there's frustrations that have come out of that. And interestingly, quite often the solution to that is replacing the person not talking about it. So that would say to you, it's probably one of those things whereby, one, the CFO needs to get on the front foot and talk about it. But if for whatever reason, and again, these things can happen, can't they? Something has gone unseen or unnoticed, and it has managed to slip through the net, and it's come out as a surprise, and we're having to tell the investors about it. They're obviously going to be frustrated. Then tackling that, recognizing they're going to be frustrated. Don't shove your head in the sand and pretend it's not going to be a story, because more often than not it will be. So get out on the front foot and deal with it, even if you haven't been able to do that proactively in the first place.
Yeah, I'm taking a real theme of no surprises from all the conversation today.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
Thank you so much, Peter. I think, it's really good to sort of dig into those areas and ask on behalf of the audience what it's really like when boards are recruiting for CFOs. So please join me in thanking Peter